Abba, my Father, I just want to thank you for this day. Sure, Abba, thank you for this wonderful time of worship that we've had, that we understand that truly you are raising up a people and that you are calling forth a sleeping bride and you're telling her to wake up and arise and to shine. And Father, I thank you that we have entered into the new season now, as the season of these feasts has just ended, and as we've now entering into the preparation again for the next lot of feasts. And so this is how you work. You work with us in the seasons that we find ourselves in, and this is the season right now of bringing in the harvest in the land of Eretz Israel, where they would bring in the fruit harvest. And that is why in this time you asked me to be able to do this teaching that has to do with the 7 species of the fruit of the land. And I just want to thank you, Abba Father, because if I think of where every single week I come and I sit before you and I say, Father, I don't know what I could possibly speak about this, but you are so faithful that by your Ruach, you open up this word for us. You open up the mind of our understanding. You're giving us deeper revelation of who you are. You're giving us the deeper revelation of the understanding of who Yeshua is, and He being the one that leads us by the hand and is taking us into that place of intimacy, to be able to return back to that place of the Garden of Eden where we are to dwell with you in the cool of the day. And so, Abba, what a privilege we have. And I stand in awe. I stand in awe, my Father, because you're the one who showed me in the dream that I was going to be teaching this. And I stand in awe of what you're doing in this hour. And I thank you, Father, that even right now, as Eretz Israel finds themselves in this time of a confinement, in this time of where they are in a cleft of the rock, whether they want to receive it or not, as them being in the second lockdown of theirs. And I just pray, Abba Father, that they will have such a sense of your presence, such a sense of who you are, and how privileged we were to be able to finish this feast of Sukkot. And straight as we finished the feast of Sukkot, the very next day we received our rain. And Father, we need the rain. We need the latter rain. We need the rain of your Ruach HaKodesh. We need the rain of your actual rain from heaven to water our land, but at the same time to water our thirsty mouths that we have. We thirst for you, my King. We hunger and thirst for more of your presence. We hunger and thirst to be able to come to know you in that intimate place. And I pray today, Father, that you will take us deeper and make us understand this new wine and what Yeshua has come to do, and how Yeshua has come to give us the new wine, and that we will understand the purpose and the plan of the beginning and the end, because there is a beginning and there is the end. And thank you, Abba Father, that you have come to bring a restoration plan. And this is what Yeshua has come to do, to bring us into a restoration plan, to restore all things that has fallen and that was lost. But Father, this takes us laying down things that sometimes our flesh wants to hold on to, because it's not easy to lay down the things that we enjoy and the things that we like. But I pray, Father, that truly you are the one that's going to take us deeper. And that we will be a remnant of people that are going to be able to reign and rule with you. To be able to reign and rule over the house of Eretz Israel. And I pray that you will truly be the gardener. And that we will be that vine. That you can pick the fruit of our fruit, can become the fruit of that vine that needs to be crushed, so that you may be able to have a drink offering to give to those that will come around us, Abba. just as Yahushua became the drink offering for us. That no servant is greater than his master, and that we too would be willing to lay down. And so I thank you, Father, that I can commit this time to you. I thank you, Father, that you alone will be able to come and teach us by the Ruach. And I thank you, Abba Father, that you speak to my mind and speak through my lips the very oracles that you're wanting to reveal in the hour that we're in, so that we can be a people that will wake up and that we may birth and come forth as truly you are wanting a people that are going to reflect your glory, as you came to reflect your glory. And so I thank you for this in Yahushua's name. Amen. Amen. So we are just going to recap a little bit with last week, as I know that there's a lot of new people, and for the sake of the new people, I will just quickly give an introduction of where we are, and so that we can understand that Father has basically got us working through the species, the 7 species of the land. And so we have covered the pomegranate, and so we have covered the olive, and so we have covered the barley. And now we are busy with the vine. We are busy with the grapes and the significance of the grapes. And I'm sure for those of you that were here last week, you will agree with me that Father really came to shake, and Father really came to bring a powerful word. Sure, it was very powerful. And I'm excited about the understanding of this grape, because as the Father is uncovering this thing of this new wine, that I myself, like I said to Elsie this morning, for me personally, as the Father was opening this up to me from last week and again in the early hours of this morning, that I said, my Father, this is like one of the most powerful teachings that I've ever heard. That I've ever heard, because it didn't come from me. It's come from Him and that which He's doing. And so I really trust that He's going to be the one to be able to open it up in the revelation of the understanding, so that we will stop our straying and our struggling, because we tend to struggle sometimes, because when something new comes, it makes it difficult that we don't want to always receive. And then we want to maybe go and try and search the scripture to maybe have what we want in our flesh. Oh, I do that myself. Like even right now, in my struggling of where I am right now, of finding myself being here and not in Israel, I myself am struggling where I say, okay, Father, you know what? I want to be there, but you have me here, and it's a struggle. But I have to lay down, and as I lay down, and as we sang the song, my life is not my own. My will is not my own. Nothing of me is my own. And so if whatever it is that He's got me to go through, it's because of His purpose and His plan. And you know, last week I just had to come to the revelation of the understanding of, sure, you think about it. You're so on about you being there, but it's because I'm holding on to the past of how I would experience my feasts there. But when I really sat down and I thought about it, my goodness, I was going to be tied in my apartment and I wasn't going to go anywhere anyway. I wasn't going to be in Jerusalem. I wasn't going to be part of the festivities. I wasn't going to be part of all of that. And so sometimes we try and hold on to something here because we're looking at the past and what your flesh might give up on. But what you don't understand is what the Father's got for you is far greater than what you got right now. And oh my gosh, I couldn't have had it any other way. The fact that I was able to dwell in my tent for the 8 days. I've never been able to do that in the land of Israel because, yes, I've been able to dwell in the tent maybe 1 or 2 days, or otherwise we are in sukkahs when we go and eat at an eating place in Jerusalem. But I certainly am not dwelling in a tent. And so this was just a different experience, and just to be able to be with people and celebrating it was beautiful. But you see, many times we hold on to something because we are bound by what we feel we need in our flesh right now, and we're not willing to lay down to be able to get the greater thing that the Father wants to give us. And when it comes to wine, and when it comes to the understanding of wine, it's difficult for us to lay down an understanding to say, sure, can I lay down a fermented wine? Can I lay it down? Because we enjoy it. So why lay it down? Do you understand? But if we understand the bigger revelation and the bigger picture of what the Father is doing, then we start to understand it's not so bad. Because I'm destined for a much greater purpose. And so, when we looked right in the beginning of Genesis, and we saw from when Noah came out of the ark, and we looked in Genesis chapter 9, from verses 20 to 21, we saw that Noah, the man of the soil, began and planted a vineyard. So, interesting, the very first thing that we hear that Noah does, is plant a vineyard. Isn't that interesting? The very first thing. He comes off an ark before you are hearing him speak about anything. He's going to plant a vineyard. And he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. And you see what I'm saying? What does fermented wine eventually do to us when we consume just that little bit too much? We let our hair down. And what I say is, what's too much? Because at the end of the day, we are called to be in a sound mind. I know a friend of mine that she had people come over to visit, and they brought a bottle of wine, and she was, just enjoying a glass of wine with them. And that night, when she came to lay down, she started to become attacked. In her room, she was being attacked by the demonic spirits. And because she'd had just that little bit, she wasn't drunk. She just had that little bit too much wine. She was battling to fight these demonic spirits that were coming in her mind because she was not in a sound mind. And the only thing that she could do was put herself under her talit. She took her talit, she put herself under talit, and she started to cry out to the Father, and she started to say, Father, please, will you help me? And the next morning when she woke up, the Father said to her, do you see what your wine has done to you? You were not able to stand, and the enemy had an open door, and the enemy came to torment you. And so what I'm saying is, we are going to have a look at this in a deeper revelation, because at the end of the day, it's easy for us to be able to turn around and say, but what's wrong with wine? But we are going to look today at the new wine. So I'm wanting to bring to your attention, for those of you that were not here, I'm wanting to bring to your attention that the very first thing that Noah did was plant a vineyard, become drunk, become uncovered, and because of that, it brought a curse upon not his son Ham, but his son's son Canaan. And because of that, Canaan was cursed. And from here, we see that then the land of Israel that's given to Shem, that comes from the bloodline of Noah through Shem, is given the land of Canaan. And so when we understand, like I went into detail last week of understanding exactly what happened in this account, but I'm starting with this because if you don't understand this, you're not going to understand where we're going to go today in terms of the very first miracle that Yeshua did. The very first miracle that Yeshua did is the very first thing that happens here. So Yeshua is going to bring a restoration of that which has been destroyed from the beginning. And that is what we need to understand. And so when the Father starts to open this up to us, we start to understand the bigger plan. So let us go and have a look, because last week we spoke a lot about fermented wine. What this fermented wine does, he spoke about the prophets that are prophesying because they drink this wine that has made them drunk. And they're coming from a vision that is not from a sound place. And so now we are going to look at the new wine. Because the Bible talks about wine and it talks about a new wine. So what is this new wine? So let's go have a look at Numbers chapter 13, because I want to be able to build a foundation for us to understand what, you see, if we don't understand the Father's plan, then we don't understand what the Father's doing. It's the same as no man goes into battle unless they have a strategy. So the Father from the beginning has had a strategy. We seem to think in our own little mindsets, we seem to think we arrive on this earth and we've just been planted here. And, maybe by some chance I find out what's my purpose and my plan for being over here. And I just go about every day as it's being another day. And that's how the people of the world are carrying on. But that's not the Father's way. And that's not the Father's plan. Because from the beginning, when they fell in the Garden of Eden, Father had a plan. And the plan has been to restore us back to that which we have fallen from. That has been His plan. So, let's go and have a look at Numbers 13. We're going to read from verses 17 to 24. Now this is when the children of Israel are sitting in the wilderness, and now they're going to spy out this promised land. Remember, the land of Canaan became cursed through who? Through Ham, who looked upon the father's nakedness, uncovered his nakedness because of his father's drunkard state, and because of that, he cursed his firstborn son. He cursed Canaan. And now the whole land of Canaan, which we discussed last week, becomes part of the inheritance that's been given to Shem. So Shem has been given that as an inheritance to be able to have that land. So here are the children of Israel coming out of Egypt in the wilderness, and now they're going to go spy out the promised land. Now listen to what Moshe says. Moshe sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up here into the south, and go up to the mountains, and see what the land is like, and the people who dwell in it, whether strong or weak, whether few or many, and whether the land they dwell in is good or evil, whether the cities they inhabit are in the camps or in strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. And you shall be strong, and bring of the fruit of the land." So he's telling them, you're going to go into this promised land, and I want you to bring me back the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first fruits of the grapes. Interesting. The time was the season of the first fruits of the grapes. So understand, Yeshua is our first fruits offering that was given for us. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Sin, as far as the Rehob near the entrance of Hamath. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron, and Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. Now Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Mitzrayim. And they came to the Wadi Eshkol and cut down from there a bunch with one cluster of grapes. And they bore it between two of them on a pole, also of the pomegranates and of the figs. Imagine, my goodness, how big this cluster of grapes was. 2 people had to carry this cluster of grapes. How big was that cluster that 2 men were holding it on a pole? Now imagine the blessing of the land that they were going into. That place was called the Wadi Eshkol because the cluster which the men of Israel cut down from there. So you see, they're bringing in this huge cluster of this grapes because it was in the time of the first fruits. So this was a time of where the grapes was in harvest, it was the time of when the pomegranates was in harvest, and it was the time of when the figs was in harvest. So we know that this would have been at the time of Sukkot, because that is when the fruit harvest is coming in. So now we see here that this was the first fruits harvest that was coming in. Now we're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 33 from verses 28. Let's go look at Deuteronomy 33, because we need to lay a foundation to understand what was the Father saying to the children of Israel. What was He saying to them? So from Deuteronomy 33 verses 28 to 29, listen to what He says. Blessed are you, O Israel, who is like you. So, blessed are you, Israel, fullness of the house of Israel. Remember, these are the 12 tribes of the house of Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by Yahuwah, the shield of your help, He who is the sword of your excellency. So who is the shield of their help? Who's the one that becomes the shield of their help? Who is the one that is going to be the sword of your excellency? And your enemies are subdued for you. You tread down their high places. So here's a prophetic look at blessed are you, Israel. Who is like you? A people by Yahuwah, the shield of your help, He who is the sword of your excellency. So Yahuwah is the sword of their excellency, and He is the shield of their help. But who becomes the sword and who becomes their help? None other than our Messiah, who's the one who's going to be sent for us. So this is already looking at the promise. It's Deuteronomy 33 verses 28. Sorry, I didn't read 28. Thus Israel dwells... Okay, so let's read from verse 28. Thus Israel dwells in safety, the fountain of Jacob alone, in the land of grain and new wine. His heavens also drop down dew. Do you see? The land of grain and new wine. So when they were going to enter into this promised land, this land was going to be a land that was going to give them new wine. It was not going to be a land that was going to give them this wine that's supposed to be a wine that's supposed to bring them in intoxication. It's supposed to be a wine that's going to be able to be given to them, that is going to be a new wine. Now let's look at Isaiah 65. We're going to read from verses 8 and 9. Now look at what he says. So let's just read from verse 7. Your crookedness and the crookedness of your fathers together, says Yahuwah, who burnt incense on the mountains, and reproached me on the hills, and I shall measure their former work into their bosom. Thus said Yahuwah, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and the one shall say, do not destroy it, for there is blessing in it. So I do for my servants' sake, not to destroy them all. So you see, he's not going to destroy the whole house of Israel. There's going to be a remnant that's going to come forth from them. Because understand, they were supposed to go into the promised land and once again bring about his purposes and plans. But what did they do? He says there, you went and offered incense and burnt incense on the hills. So we know that Israel did many things that was wrong, didn't they? And look at what he says in verse 9. And I shall bring forth a seed from Yaakov and from Yehudah, an heir of my mountains, and my chosen ones shall inherit it, and my servants shall dwell there. So do you see? He is going to bring forth a remnant, and this remnant is going to be filled with his new wine. And they are going to come into the promised land, because they entered into a promised land, but once again, defilement has taken place. So once again, what are we waiting for? To enter into a promised land again, is it not? When Yahushua comes, we will then enter into the reign, into the millennial reign for 1,000 years, into our promised land that we need to come into. Because if we start to read scriptures in this Bible, which we are going to read, some of them, but when you start to read scriptures in this Bible, especially when it comes to the books of the prophets, the land that is spoken of there is not the land of Israel today, that's living in safety and in peace. That's not the land that is spoken of in the books of the prophets. Because a lot of the things is still to be fulfilled. So we need to understand, some things has been, some things is, some things is going to come. And that is how we understand the books of the prophets. So this is when we see this new season. This is the season of the new wine. We are about to encounter Yahushua as never before. We are now in the season of the new wine. And we are about to encounter Yahushua. We are about to understand our Messiah in a way that we have not understood. Because He is the first fruits offering. He is the one that's bringing us. Who is taking us into that promised land? I mean, we had Noah, who started off in the beginning. Then we had Abraham, who started a new generation. Then we had Moses, who brought them into the promised land. But in all this time, there has been defilement that has taken place, that has brought us into the contamination of drinking from a cup of the Father's wrath because of the wine of the flesh that we have been drinking from. Because the cup that came from Noah with the vine that was planted was a vine that brought no good thing. And this is the serpent seed that has come down with us all along. And only Yahushua is the first fruits that comes to be able to be the first fruits offering that has the perfect blood with no serpent seed. And it's only His blood that's going to be able to set us free. Only His blood. And it's interesting. We will see how we start with the first miracle and how we end with His blood, with Him drinking from the vine. So that's what we need to understand. It's been His plan from the beginning of the redemption that He wanted to bring. So we understand, we are going to see the revelation of Yahushua and all He has done for us. We look at the new wine. Let's go and look where our Bible is going to talk about the new wine. And we're going to look at Luke chapter 5. Now this story is repeated. We're looking at Luke chapter 5. We're going to read from verses 30 to 39. This story is repeated in Matthew 9, 14 to 17, and repeated in Mark 2:18 to 22. But we are going to read Luke 5, because there's something in Luke that is not mentioned in Matthew and in Mark. And this is the one that he wants us to look at. So, from verses 30 he says, "And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled against his taught ones, saying, 'Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?' And Yeshua answered, said to them, 'Those who are well do not need a physician, but those who are sick.'" So you see, Yeshua came for the lost tribes of the house of Israel. Remember he said, "I came for the lost tribes of the house of Israel." When he started his ministry, where did he go? He got mikvah, and straight away, where did he go? He went into Galilee. Why into Galilee? Because that's where the tribes went astray. He didn't start in the south. He started in the north. Okay. Now look and see. "Those who are well do not need a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." So praise the Father. We were the sinners that needed to come to repentance, because why? We are the ones that had gone astray. We are the ones that were not keeping his ways. And they said to him, "Why do the taught ones of Yochanan fast often and make prayers, and likewise those of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink?" So now he's looking at these disciples of Yeshua that are eating and they're drinking, enjoying. But yet, John's disciples were fasting. They were obviously most probably keeping some of the fasts of the Jewish traditions. Do you understand? Because there are specific Jewish traditions that are being passed down to us that we don't need to keep. I'm not talking about the things of the feasts. I'm talking about customs and traditions. Because when you look at the Jewish calendar, there's certain fast days that they will fast, like they fast for Tammuz and they fast for all these things, which is not scriptural, which goes against the word, as a matter of fact. So, he turns around and he says, "And he said to them, 'Are you able to make the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them?'" So Yeshua was coming to bring them another way. This is the bridegroom. The bridegroom is with his disciples, and the bridegroom is bringing them another way. The bridegroom is coming to show them the way. That's a new way, a new wine. "But days shall come when the bridegroom is taken away from them. Then they shall fast in those days." And is that not where we are today? Once again now we are having to humble ourselves on our knees, having to seek the Father, having to fast, having to seek Him in order to draw closer to Him, because we do not have the privilege that the disciples had when He was with them. Now we need to seek His face, and we want to dwell with Him. "And He also spoke a parable to them." Now listen to what He says. "No one puts a piece from a fresh garment on an old one. Otherwise the fresh one makes a tear. And also the pieces that was taken out of the fresh ones does not match the old one." I mean, think about it. If you go by, I know, just take myself who makes clothes. If I go and put like a piece of white lace on a white dress that's already been used and washed and been mixed with other clothes, that white lace that's there is not going to match the dress that's there, because it's now too white for the rest, and it's like an off-white already, and it doesn't look very nice. So this is what he's trying to say. You're not going to put a new piece of cloth on something that is brand new. An old piece of cloth, a new piece of cloth doesn't get put on something that is old, because the colorings is not the same. Because from the washing and everything it discolors. And that's what he's trying to explain. So what is he saying? That which I'm going to bring is going to be brand new. And you are not going to be able to put something that's brand new on something that's old, and your way of doing things, and your understanding of the way you've done things, because this is the way it's been done all along. But I'm about to bring you a new way of looking at things. Now he gets to the place where he says, "And no one puts new wine into an old wineskin. Otherwise, the new wine shall burst the wineskins and run out, and the wineskins shall be ruined. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and both are preserved. And this is what Matthew and Mark says, but listen to it carries on in Luke. Luke 5:39 says, and no one having drank old wine immediately desires the new wine, for he says the old is better. You see, that's where we all are. So when we start to bring a new revelation, the first thing that you're going to do is say, no, let me not go there, because I like that which I did before. The same as when you start to walk a path of when you're wanting to start keeping Torah, straight away the people in the church say, no, we don't want to do this, because we like to eat our pork, because we like to do our things, because we want to worship on a Sunday, because we want to do all of this, because the old is better. Do you understand? But now I say something else to you, which is what the Father said to me this morning. How do you put fermented wine in a brand new wineskin? Because if you're going to put brand new wine that has just been pressed by the grapes, that is your new wine. Your new wine is not a wine that has been fermented. Your new wine is not a wine that has stayed in a wineskin that is fermented in the meantime. A new wine is a wine that has just been crushed, that has just been pressed, that is just the brand new wine that has come forth. And that is the wine that he's talking about. It's this freshly squeezed wine, this brand new wine that has just been pressed, that has just been squeezed, that is still grape juice. And how are you going to go put that inside a wineskin that has already had fermented wine in there? And now expect so that when you're going to pour it, it's going to be any good. It cannot. You are going to have to put it into a new wineskin. And I said, your Father, that just made absolute sense to me. Because at the end of the day, this is the thing. We do not want this freshly squeezed. Today, if Abba permits, I want us to be able to drink the wine that comes from Israel. We are going to take communion together, just like Yeshua broke bread and took communion. We are going to take communion. And you are going to taste the wine that is a wine that's coming from Israel, that has no pork in it, that's not going to be made with gelatine that comes from the pigs. Because even this wine that we get that's got no alcohol in it, you better go look into it, because if it's got the gelatine, if it's not bovine, the gelatine that they will use is going to be pork gelatine. So you say, I don't eat any pork. Okay, but if you're going to have the gelatine, that's why you need to look into your yogurt, and you need to look into many things, because if it's not bovine, and if it's not a vegetable stabilizer that is in there, then what is it? It's going to be made of pork. And this is how we're being deceived all the time. We keep one thing out, but another thing comes in, because that's what the enemy wants to do. The enemy wants us to constantly be defiled. So even though that wine might not be fermented, because now at the time of when we were not able to have wine, remember, we were able to buy wine that was not fermented, but we still need to look into that. But the one that comes from Israel, the one that we will have at Shabbat, the one that we have at feasts, I'll have you know, in the land of Israel, we're talking about in the time of the Bible, they at the feasts and at weddings, they never had fermented wine. They never had that. It was a feasting time that you were not to get drunk. How could the feast of the Father be a feast to get drunk? Never. How would you be able to have fermented wine being served at a wedding when their weddings would go on for 3, 4, 5, like we're going to have a wedding feast for 7 days? How are you going to have fermented wine being given there? People will be on their ears totally drunk, going against Torah. Do you see what I'm saying? Just in the logic of the way things are, we already understand. Father was not going to have wine being served at his feasts, because the people were not to get drunk at his holy feasts. Do you understand? But you see, we are wanting to follow what the Jews are doing in the land of Israel right now, that are as rebellious, right now, as rebellious, where they themselves are not in the right place. And that is why the Father says, I am going to gather a remnant. Because if they're not going to come in line, I am going to have a house who's going to serve me. I am going to have a set apart people. I am going to have a priesthood. And we're going to look at this today. I am going to have a set apart priesthood. And my priesthood will not bring wine into my temple. So, we see here when he says in verse 39, we look at it again. No one having drank old wine immediately desires the new. For he says the old is better. And this is where we find ourselves today. We find ourselves that when the Father wants to bring us new revelation, we don't want to walk in it. Because the old is better. And this is why I struggle in my flesh. And this is why we got to crucify the flesh. Because the minute the new way comes, we don't want it. Because the old is better. So when the Father started to change my clothing, when the Father started to change many things about me, I didn't want it. Why? Because I prefer the way it was before. And this is the problem. Father is bringing us onto a new, because He's changing us from glory to glory. Because everything about the new wine has to do with His glory. So, now we're going to look and see. So, He's come to bring us into the new wine. Yeshua wants to bring us into the new wine. He wants to raise up a new generation. He wants to raise up a new order. So, let's look at what Yeshua did from His mikvah. So, Yeshua was mikvahed. So, what is the new wine? Let's go look and see. So, we are in Luke. Let's go to Luke chapter 3. So everything about Yeshua is to bring us a new order. And that's what we need to understand. But you see, because of the mindsets, of our religious mindsets, we have made Yeshua be someone that's there, that's come to be able to set me free from everything of my flesh, that I can just do whatever I like and I can just be whatever I like. And I don't have a leader to basically lead me. And Yeshua is my leader. And He's the one who's going to lead me. So let's look and see what He says in Luke 3, verses 21 to 23. And it came to be, when all the people were immersed, Yeshua also having been immersed and praying, the heavens was opened, and the set-apart Ruach descended on in bodily form, like a dove upon Him. And a voice came from heaven saying, You are my Son, the beloved, in you I did delight. So, when Yeshua was mikvahed, what was it that we received? So it's Luke 3, 21 to 23. So 21 says, and it came to be when all the people were immersed. So remember, John the baptizer, John the immersed, they're sitting there and he's busy baptizing the people as they're coming and they're repenting for their sins, and he's busy baptizing them in the river Jordan. And now here comes Yeshua, and he comes to be baptized. And what happens? The set-apart Spirit comes upon him. And the Father says that you are my beloved Son, the beloved, in you I did delight. And when Yeshua himself began, he was about 30 years of age. So understand, this Yeshua is going to first be mikvahed, and then we're going to see it. So let's go back now at Luke 3, 16 to 17. So we see Yeshua is mikvahed. But if we look at verses 16 and 17, what was John prophesying? What was he prophesying? So let's look at Luke 3. Yochanan answered, saying to them, I indeed immerse you in water, but one mightier than I is coming, whose sandal straps I am not worthy to loosen. He shall immerse you in set-apart spirit and in fire. Important for you to understand. We don't just receive the Ruach of Yahuwah, but we're going to receive the fire. Because it's that purging fire, which is what the Father said He was releasing at the Sukkot. He said, I'm releasing a fire, the fire of my love, which is the purifying, purging, refining, to be able to now. We've already all received the Ruach. Well, we all say we've received the Ruach. but have we received the fire of the purging? Because listen to what he says in verses 17. His winnowing fork is in his hand, and he shall thoroughly cleanse his threshing floor, and gather the wheat into his storehouse, but the chaff he shall burn with unquenchable fire. So he's going to have to separate us. Now next week we're going to look at the wheat, and where he's going to separate the chaff from the wheat. But he says he needs to bring a purging, a purifying fire that's going to have to separate from us those things which is not holy, those things which is not set apart. So if he said that wine in his temple, fermented wine in his temple, strong drink was unclean, then why are we going to have it in our temple? Do you understand? So we see here that this is what John was speaking about Yeshua. So when Yeshua came and he was filled with the Ruach of Yahuwah, the Ruach of Yahuwah comes also as a fire, it's a winnowing fork, and it's going to bring us to cleanse his threshing floor. So remember, he wants a clean vessel. So a clean vessel needs to be able to go through a cleansing process, which is the purifying fire. So now we look at Luke 4. What happens in Luke 4? If we look at the whole of Luke 4, this is when Yeshua now, straight after, look and see, straight after he's been mikvahd, where does he go? Look at verse 1 of chapter 4, Luke 4 verse 1. And Yeshua, being filled with the set-apart Spirit, returns from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. So where did the children of Israel? The children of Israel went through the Jordan. They went through the Red Sea. And straight after the Red Sea, they come into what? The wilderness. To be what? To be tested in the wilderness. We have to go through our tests to see, will we crucify our flesh and allow him to reign and rule in our lives? So if Yeshua is going to have to be tested, so will we. So are we going to have to be tested to make the decision whether we will be able to follow him or not. And right now I have news for you. We are all being weighed. We are all being tested. We are all in the fire. We are in the scales that's being tested to see, are you going to be able to allow me to purge you? Are you going to be able to allow me to set you apart so that you can become that holy vessel for me? And so straight away he goes and he's going to be tested by the devil. So the enemy will come and speak in your little mind and say, did Yeshua really say this? Do you really have to do this? Do you really have to stop this wine? But you know what? A little wine is good for you. Nothing wrong with it. And these are the things that we are going to be tested right now. Because we are in a time now that we need to understand he's going to separate the chaff from the wheat. He's going to separate those that are his from those that are not. I don't care how many people are keeping Torah. Torah goes still refined even more to being able to be a set-apart bride. So just the fact that you keep Torah, just the fact that you keep feasts and keep his commands is not everything. Because we need to be a holy, set-apart people that need to follow our Messiah. Now I ask you something. If Messiah himself was a vessel that was supposed to become a priest for the Father, was he going to put any alcohol into his body? No, so why are we? But you see, these are the things that are not being preached, because these are the deeper revelation of the things that need to come, because we need to follow our Messiah, and we need to get a deeper revelation of our Messiah. So, if we look at Luke chapter 4, verses 14, look at what happens from verses 14 now. He says, and Yeshua returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and the news of him went out throughout all the surrounding countries. And he was teaching in the congregations, being praised by all. And he came to Nazareth. So straight after he's been tested in the wilderness, the very first place he goes to is Galilee. And I've told you, why Galilee? He goes north. because that's where the lost tribes have gone astray. Then Isaiah chapter 61. Now if we're going to look at Isaiah 61, I put there that it's only verses 14 to 19. Let's continue reading. And he was teaching in the congregation, being praised by all, and he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And according to his practice, he went into the congregation on the Sabbath day, and stood up to read. So interesting. He's in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Not on a Sunday. On a Sabbath. And what is he doing? He's reading from the Torah. He's reading from the Torah and the books of the prophets. And the scroll of the prophet Yeshayahu was handed to him. And having unrolled the scroll, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of Yahuwah is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring the good news to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to the captives, and the recovery of sight to the blind, to send away crushed ones with release, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahuwah." Okay, so now I want you to see the pattern, because you need to see the pattern of why Yeshua came, and the pattern of Yeshua is the pattern of our lives, because we are following our Messiah. So first of all, he's mikvahd. When he comes out of the mikvah, he goes straight into the wilderness. He's going to get tempted in the wilderness. From there, he's going to go into Galilee. And in Galilee, he's going to be able to start the work that he's been called to do, which is in verses 18. Now I want you to hear, because we spoke last week about the fact that he said, "I've told you, you are a set-apart people, a holy nation, a generation of set-apart priests." Now, listen to your prophetic word, because Yeshua is speaking here. This is him. We are called to follow him. Let's go to Isaiah 61. For us to understand what is Abba Yahuwah's purpose from the beginning, to be able to set the people apart. What was the purpose of Yeshua coming? There has to be a purpose. Now listen to Isaiah 61. So when Yeshua had prophesied there in Luke chapter 4, what was he prophesying? He was reading about himself, and he was reading about that which he was coming to do. Now listen to what Isaiah 61 says. And we're going to read the whole of Isaiah 61. Make note, this is a prophetic word for us. "The Spirit of the Master Yahuwah is upon me, because Yahuwah has anointed me to bring good news to the meek." So as he comes, so that you may be able to bring good news to those who don't have it. Yes, he did. Because he says, as I have gone, now you've got to go and make disciples of all nations. Okay. To bring good news to the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. So is the Father going to bring us the brokenhearted? Absolutely. To proclaim release to the captives. So there are those that are captive by demonic spirits because of their flesh. And we need to be able to help them to set free. By them being crucified by the flesh, they will then be set free. And the opening of the prisons to those who are bound. So there are those that the enemy has them bound in prisons of their own minds by the religious demons that keep us captive because we have not walked in truth. And that is why we need to be set free. Because we have been bound by religious demons that have kept us in the prisons of the lies that we have believed. And therefore we are not those that have been set free. Now listen to what he says. To proclaim the acceptable year of Yahuwah. This is the season and the time of where we are proclaiming the acceptable year of Yahuwah. Because from the time Yeshua came, that was the acceptable year of Yahuwah. And the day of the vengeance of our Eluah to comfort all mourn. So from the time of Yeshua's coming, we were to proclaim that Yeshua's coming with vengeance. And there's going to be a day of judgment. But you see, we want to pussyfoot around things, and we want to pussyfoot and say, "Oh, don't worry about that. That's not for now." This is what we are to proclaim. I distinctly remember Noah proclaiming to the people that the rain was going to come and that they were going to go into destruction. But they did not want to listen. So from the time of Yeshua's coming, we are to proclaim that the year of the Father's vengeance is going to come. And we are now drawing very near to this time. To appoint unto those who mourn in Zion, to give them embellishment for ashes and the oil of joy for mourning. So praise the Father, because this new wine is the oil of joy that is given us. And that is what was released at Yom Teruah, when the Father said, put on that spray of the oil of joy that is being released. And that was the work that the Father had me do on Mount Zion last year, because I was with Linda from Lady Rose magazine, and she released the oil that was it was called joy. And that is why we're going to need that joy, because the joy of Yahuwah is our strength in a time of great destruction. So He's going to give us joy for mourning. So even though the world is going to go into mourning, we are going to have the joy of Yahuwah, knowing that our Messiah is coming. Praise the Father. The garments of praise for the spirit of heaviness. So even though the heaviness is going to come, we are going to praise. Amen. And they shall be called trees of righteousness. Wow. There we are. A planting of Yahuwah to be adorned. He's going to adorn us with His beauty. And they shall rebuild. So who are these now? And they shall rebuild the old ruins and raise up the former wastes. And they shall restore the ruined cities and the wastes of many generations. This is the remnant of those that are going to raise up now. And who are they? And the strangers shall stand and feed your flocks, and the sons of the foreigner be your plowmen and your vine dressers. So there's going to be new vine. There's going to be new vines and vine dressers, but it's going to be in a land that's not going to be contaminated, because it's going to be a land that's going to be the millennial reign for the 1,000 years, where no contamination will be there. But you shall be called priests of Yahuwah. So what did we establish? What did we establish last week? We said the priests were not to contaminate themselves with the wine in the temple, because they were set apart holy unto Him, and nothing that was unclean was allowed in His temple. So if we are those priests that He's going to raise up now, neither will we have it in our temples. You shall, so He says, priests of Yahuwah, servants of Eloah, shall be said of you. You shall consume the strength of nations and boast in their esteem. So we shall consume the boast of nations and their esteem. We are going to see the glory of Yahuwah instead of your shame. So you know what? We're going to go through many things. We're going to go through many struggles in the days ahead of us. But listen to your prophetic word. Instead of your shame and reproach, they rejoice a second time in their portion. Therefore, they take possession a second time in their land. Everlasting joy is theirs. So we will take possession of our promised land. There's a promised land being promised to us. And this is the prophetic, not of the land of Israel that is there right now. So a second time, we are going to take possession of the land, which will be the remnant of the house of Israel. Because this one right now has been defiled. It's in this defiled state. And that is why the shaking is going to come. For I, Yahuwah, love right ruling. That's why He's not going to have defilement, because He wants right ruling. I, Yahuwah, love right ruling. I hate robbery for ascending offerings. And I shall give their reward in truth, and make an everlasting covenant with them. So you see, who's He talking about here? This is a set-apart priesthood. This is a holy priesthood. This is the true bride that is raising up in the hour that we're in, that's going to drink of this new wine that is being given us. And their seed shall be known among the nations, and their offspring in the midst of the peoples. and all who see them shall acknowledge them, and they are the seed of Yahuwah, that the seed that Yahuwah has blessed. Praise Abba Father. I don't know about you, but that's who I want to be. That's who I want to be. So do you see, if we do not understand where we're going, if we do not understand what's ahead of us, then it's a difficult thing that I'm going to say, well, you know what, let me continue to drink my wine because I don't want to really give this up. But when you understand who you are being called to be, then you understand that what you've got to give up is nothing in comparison to what you're going to get. Remember what I said to you. When we only see what we see right now, then it's difficult for us because we don't want to give it up. But when we understand what is lying ahead of us, then it's not easy, it's not difficult to give it up because, my goodness, because you love Him, you don't mind to give all this up because you know who you want to be. I greatly rejoice in Yahuwah, my being exalts in my Lua, for He has put garments of deliverance on me. So you see, Yeshua's blood comes to deliver us. And we're going to look at this in a much deeper revelation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness as a bridegroom. So you see, He's the bridegroom that's going to cover you with a robe of righteousness. So this is the bridegroom that's going to come, that's going to cover this bride. And that righteousness we covered in intense detail in the pomegranate. We went into this righteousness, which is this pomegranate. As a bridegroom decks himself with ornaments, as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. So what is the jewels that He's adorning us with? His jewels. It's not necessarily jewels on the outside. It's His jewels of the revelation of this word that I have come to understand in just this season of when we came into this time of this of Sukkot. As we were ending Sukkot, the prophetic word is He's going to give us the jewels of the revelations of His word, so that we may know who He is in a deeper way. For as the earth brings forth its bud, as the gardener causes its seed to shoot up, so the Master Yahuwah causes righteousness and praise to shoot up before all the nations. And what is that righteousness? The fact that we come into right standing with Him, the fact that we come back to keeping ways of Torah. That's righteousness. There's no righteousness without returning back to Torah, because the Torah of Yahuwah is His righteousness. And we've covered that in detail when I went through the pomegranate. So, this is the prophetic word for us. So now we look and see, what is this new wine? Let's start by looking at the new wine that Yeshua, what was the new wine that Yeshua received? He received, remember, Torah was written only on tablets of stone. But now Yeshua comes and the Ruach is put within Him. But He says, I'm going to need to die to become the first fruits so that His Ruach can be put upon you to write Torah upon the tablets of our hearts. Understand? So, let's look at Acts 2 verses 1 to 4. So, when Yeshua receives the Ruach comes upon Him, He starts to walk out His call. And He's fulfilling that which He's come to fulfill, to be the first fruits to show us the way that we are to walk. The fact that we're going to go into a wilderness, the fact that He overcame Hasatan. See, the Israelites stumbled. Remember, in Deuteronomy chapter 8, He says, I led you in the wilderness to test you. Deuteronomy chapter 8 talks about, I tested you in the wilderness to expose to you what was in your hearts. The wickedness of your own hearts. And that's why He tested them in the wilderness. Now, I have done a whole teaching on the test in the wilderness that is on the YouTube channel, which is the tests in the wilderness that I explain. The tests in the wilderness and Yeshua's testing and how I marry them all up. And Yeshua fulfills the test that the Israelites could not fulfill in the wilderness. He fulfilled it 100% by having to face Hasatan. And so that's a teaching all of its own. And so in Acts, we look at 1 to 4, what does it say? And when the day of the festival of Shavuot had come, they were all with one mind in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from the heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire. There's the fire again, and settled on each one of them. And they were all filled with the set-apart Spirit, and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them to speak. And so here's the fire of the Ruach of Yahuwah. That's not just a Ruach, but it's got to come as a consuming fire. So the reason why people are not being set apart and cleansed is because we only want a Ruach that's to be able to give us a manifestation of our flesh, but not a Ruach that is bringing us, not the Ruach of Yahuwah that's bringing us back into truth and to be able to set us apart by His word. Because the Ruach is the teacher. The Ruach of Yahuwah is Yahuwah Himself, who teaches us to be able to come back into His truths of His word. Now, interesting, if we look there from verses 12, listen to what it says from verse 12. And they were all amazed and were puzzled, saying to each other, "What does this mean?" And others mocking said, "They have been filled with sweet wine." So you see, they thought they were drunk. So you see, when a drunk person is drunk, because they didn't understand Him, because they were speaking all in different tongues, the only way that they looked at, they said they must be filled with the wine. But you're going to see the difference between a destructive wine and the wine of the Ruach. The wine of the Ruach brings us into holiness, where the wine of that which comes from the harlot brings us into the destruction of our flesh. And that is why we need the wine of the Ruach that is not fermented, because the fermented wine is what brings us into the destruction of our flesh, where the Ruach brings us into obedience into His word. So now he says, and others mocking said, "They've been filled with sweet wine." But Kepha, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice and said to them, "Men of Yehudah, and all those dwelling in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen closely to my words. For these men are not drunk, as you imagine. It is only the third hour of the day." Important that you remember the third hour of the day. Because when Yeshua does His first miracle, you will understand it's on the third day. And that is why we are in the season of the third day. And that is why we need to understand. Unless you understand seasons and times, you will not understand the prophetic things. Now, I know that sometimes the prophetic things that I speak and the prophetic things that I release, like Saturday, when the Father started to reveal many prophetic things to me, it's difficult because it's the prophetic opening up. But without us having the prophetic understanding, we do not understand the heart of the Father and what the Father is doing, because everything that the Father does is prophetic. This whole Bible of ours is prophetic. It's a prophetic book. And so he talks about the hour of the third hour of the day. So the Ruach of Yahuwah didn't just come at any time. It came at the third hour of the day. For us to understand that there is a third day. And there is a third hour. And this third day, Yeshua resurrected on the third day. So everything about this third hour, third day, is important for us to understand. So he said, but this is what this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel, and it shall be in the last day, says Elohim, that I shall pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. So you see, prophesying, seeing dreams, is all part of the signs of the times. But are we receiving these things from prophets that are in the old wine and the old wineskins, that are prophesying out of the drunkard state of what they're in? Or are we listening to visions, and are we listening to the word that is coming from the prophets that are walking in His will and in His way, according to His word, in the new wine of the Torah? And I shall show wonders in the heavens above, the signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. And the sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the coming of the great and splendid day of Yahuwah. And it shall be that every one who calls on the name of Yahuwah shall be saved. So this is why we are in a time now where we're starting to see the manifestations of the things in the heavens. And these are the seasons and the times that we see, which already started from the time of when the Ruach was given to us, from the time of the resurrection of Yahushua. So now we're going to look at Hebrews 10. Because now listen carefully. Yahushua comes in the flesh. He shows us what is our purpose and our call. He becomes the living Torah in the flesh. But now He's going to die. And as He dies, He's going to be resurrected. He's the first fruits offering, resurrected, seated at the right hand of the Father. And who is going to be given to us? The Ruach of Abba Yahuwah. The one who's going to lead us. The one who's going to write Torah on the tablets of our heart. And that is in Hebrews 10. So let's go to Hebrews chapter 10. From verse 11. And indeed every priest stands day by day doing service and repeatedly offering the same slaughter offerings which are never able to take away sins. So what was Yeshua's, the new wine that Yeshua came to bring us was the wine that's going to once and for all take away the sins of where we are not going to transgress in our flesh. And we are going to look at, just now, we're going to look at that sins in a little bit deeper understanding when we're going to look at another scripture. But He, having offered one slaughter offering for sins for all time, sat down at the right hand of Elohim. So is He seated at the right hand of Elohim? Yes. So the Father and the Son are one. He's the one seated at the right hand of the Father, waiting from the time onward until the enemies are made a footstool for His feet. That's why they were talking about David. Son of David! Son of David! And He says, well, if he was David, then how's he going to be able to make his enemies his footstool if he was David? And when they were calling out saying, Son of David, they thought he was David being reincarnated in the flesh. And He did not come as David. He came in the lineage of David. But He is the Messiah that was promised. And He's going to make His enemies come under His feet. Because we're going to look at that when we finish in the book of Revelation. For by one offering He has perfected for all time those who are being set apart. So you see, He came and He was offered as the ultimate sacrifice. He became the first fruits offering that was offered. He became that offering that was given of the wine. He became the offering of the lamb. He became the first fruit offering, so that now by His blood that He came to offer once and for all. We no longer need a temple with a high priest offering sacrifices for us. The only sacrifices that we offer now are our prayers that we are offering constantly before Abba Yahuwah. And this is the covenant that I shall make with them. And after those days, says Abba Yahuwah, giving my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I shall write them. And their sins and their lawlessness I shall remember no more. So what is He doing? He's coming once and for all to be able to set us free from the lawlessness of not keeping Torah, which was our Torahlessness. And if we look at Ezekiel 36, I know we've mentioned this many times, but we need to keep going back because we need to understand that why was the Ruach of Yahuwah given? The Ruach of Yahuwah was given to bring us back, to write Torah upon our hearts, to bring us back to keeping ways of Torah, because we had gone astray from ways of Torah. We were not keeping His word. We were not keeping His laws. We were not keeping His instructions and His commands. So now if we look at Ezekiel 36 from verses 23 to 29, it says, "And I shall set apart my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, which you have profaned among the nations, which you have profaned in their midst. And the nations shall know that I am Yahuwah, declares the Master Yahuwah, when I am set apart in you before their eyes. And I shall take you from among the nations, and I shall gather you out of the lands, and I shall bring you into your own land." So do you see, this is a dual meaning. One of them is happening with the children of Israel right now, where they have been dispersed among the nations, and He brought them back into their own land. But that includes us. And so we too are going to be gathered from among the nations, and we are going to be brought into our own land. And look at what He says. "And I shall sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your filthiness, and from all your idols I cleanse you." So this is prophetic. This is not yet. So even the children of Israel today, let's rather say the Jews that are going into the promised land today, they have not received, if they do not receive Yahushua, they are not receiving the Ruach of Yahuwah, which means that this is not prophetically for them as yet either. So they too need to receive Yahushua, because by them receiving Yahushua, they receive the Ruach of Yahuwah. So do you understand why the Father has to open their eyes, so that they too see Messiah? Because this is as much as a promise for them as what it is for us in the dispersion. So He says, "I shall give you a new heart." So, "I shall sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. From all your filthiness and from all your idols I cleanse you. And I shall give you a new heart, and put a new spirit within you. And I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh, and put my spirit within you. And I shall cause you to walk in my laws." So understand, listen, He gives us His spirit. And what is the purpose for Him giving us His spirit? So that we may walk in His laws, guard His right rulings, and shall do them. And now listen to what He says then. "And you shall dwell in the land that I give to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I shall be your Elohim." I shall be your Eloah. "And I shall save you from all your uncleanness." So do you see? We have been in our uncleanness, where we have defiled ourselves with this wine of our flesh. So the fermented wine is wine of our flesh. "And I shall save you from all your uncleanness, and I shall call for the grain and the increase it, and I shall bring no scarcity of food upon you. And I shall increase the fruit of your trees, and increase your fields, so that you need never again bear the reproach of the scarcity of food among the nations." So there's a scarcity of food that's going to come. And when He delivers us, we shall no longer have the scarcity of food. And He's going to deliver us. And that is when He's going to then bring us into our promised land, into the land of Israel, which is going to be the land of Israel that's not the one today that is still in the defilement, but when He's going to gather us from the nations, because He's cleaned us, and we are His set apart remnant that is doing His will and His way. Okay. Now, the new wine is obedience and intimacy. He's bringing us into obedience and intimacy. We follow Him in obedience, not in the old wine of the intoxication of the flesh. He's calling us to obedience and into intimacy. So let's go look at the Song of Songs. Song of Songs 1, verses 1 to 4. Song of Songs 1, verses 1 to 4. "And the Song of Songs which is of Shlomo. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth." So you see, He wants to kiss us with His new wine. that is not intoxicated with the intoxication of the wine, of what this wine of the intoxication of the flesh is going to give us. For your carnal love are better than wine. You see, the wine that we've been drinking is not a wine that's going to be of Abba Yahuwah's wine that is bringing us back into the... Okay, for those who have the Scriptures Bible, it's page 786, the Song of Solomon. So do you see, for your carnal love are better than wine. Because we need to understand that the wine that we've been drinking is this wine of the pleasure of the flesh. Because the flesh wants to be pleasured. It wants to be intoxicated with the pleasures of that which this world has got to give us. But everything of what Yeshua is coming to give us is to get us to crucify our flesh and to come into the fullness of who He is. And to be able to come into glory. How can we come into glory when He says, be holy as I'm holy? So if He's holy, we need to be holy, which means we need to walk as He walked, which means we need to crucify our fleshly desires. For fragrance your oils are good. Your name is oil poured forth. Therefore the young women love you. Draw me. We run after you. The sovereign has brought me into His inner rooms. We exult and rejoice in you. We praise your carnal love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. So do we love Him more than the wine of the flesh and the wine of the lust that the world has got to give us? Because it's like I said, like Carol and I were sharing, and as the Father is putting us through many tests in this time, and as I was sharing about my own tests that I'm having to face right now, and you know, tests presented themselves, and we have a choice to make, whether we're going to be able to give in to the flesh because the flesh looks better, and it's going to be more comfortable for me, and it's going to be more what I want, or am I going to get to that place of where I'm going to say, Father, you know what, for the sake of the love that I have for you, for the sake that you are the one that I serve, you are the one that I lay my life down for, because I love you, I will give all this up. Because I love you, I will follow you. Because I love you, I will do this, Father. If we can get to that place, I tell you something, the things that we struggle will not be so hard. If you love Him more than you love yourself, you will have no reason to lay down. No matter what. No matter what it is that's a struggle. I mean, right now He's requiring something of me that's going to be a very difficult thing. But in obedience to Him, I love Him more, and I will give up whatever He tells me to give up, because it means nothing to me because I love Him more than I love anything that is of my flesh. It doesn't really matter anyway, because this flesh is going to perish anyway. So why am I not wanting to give up a wine that I enjoy, that He's saying, but this wine that's an intoxicating wine is not good for you? Will you be willing to be set apart and pure and holy unto me? And are we willing to do that? Look at Song of Solomon 2, verse 4. He brought me to His house of wine, and His banner over me was love. So now do you know that house of wine is His banqueting house. So He brings you before a banquet, in the presence of your enemies, and His banner over you is love. So He's wanting to bring you into that place of intimacy with Him that has everything to do with you laying down your flesh so that you may dwell with Him in the cool of the day in the Garden of Eden, that there was no thing that was intoxicating there. Nothing. Flesh did not dwell there. It was only spirit that dwelled there. And are we not called to be spirit beings now? Yes, we are. So, new wine is from grapes that have been through a recent process of crushing. In Hebrew, the words new wine means freshly pressed, squeezed, expelled, and trodden out. The grapes have been through the wine press, where they have been trodden underfoot. So new wine has been produced under pressure. So must we come forth under pressure. Aphromos. Is that
Mos.
what?
Mos.
Mos.
M-O-S in Afrikaans.
Okay. Is that what it means to have?
That is what it is.
Okay. That is the pressing under the new wine. So, how are we going to become that new wine, lest we're going to be pressed? Are we going to allow him to press us with his feet? It's like, can you imagine Yeshua is coming to press us into that house of wine where his love is going to cover us, even though we might go through tremendous pressure in the days ahead of us. But in that pressure, in the days ahead of us, we will be able to come forth as this new wine. And understand something. The word in Hebrew for grape is anav. Okay? And that same word, anav, is the same word in Hebrew for humble. So, how will you be humble lest you can be pressed? There's no humility. I'm telling you, oh my Father, we're going to look at this if I finish this thing today. We're going to look at it next week. You know, the arrogant, the wheat, when he sows, the parable of the sower. I'm not going to go into that because that's next week's teaching. We must be willing to bear fruit. And for us to bear fruit, we need to humble. So if we're going to stand in our arrogance and say, I can go into the scripture and look up many scriptures, like some people do to foods that they don't want to eat, clean foods, and they will say, yeah, but what was that sheet that came down, and those animals were, they were unclean, and he says, all of this. And we can bring scriptures like that and say, because of those scriptures, I want to eat my pork and I want to eat everything else. The same as I can bring scriptures that are going to be able to say that you can go and drink wine. Because it's very difficult in what is being spoken there when we go and look in the concordance that it tells you fermented. But if we look at the teaching where you got him setting a people apart, you will see that it's not fermented wine. And if you go do your research in the wine that was being offered in the land of Israel, specifically, do you know that it's actually the elite? When I speak about the elite, I talk about the ones controlling the earth, that in the late 1800s brought the vineyards into Israel that was to bring the fermented wine. Because before that there was no fermented wine being made there. But now, I can tell you as I stand over here today, alcohol is a big problem in that land. And I know. You know why? Because when I celebrate, and I've celebrated more than 1 year, the independence of Israel in that land, and you've got 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-old children going into those, you walk into, like in our land, we've got a bottle store that's selling alcohol. In Israel, you don't have a bottle store. You have a supermarket, and the very first thing that you enter when you enter the supermarket, you go through the alcohol before you even get to the food.
Yeah.
And now you've got 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 12-year-olds. They don't come with their ID document. They go and buy little tots that costs them like 20 shekels, and they buy a little tot. And on that Independence Day, on the Independence Day of Israel, there's one big celebration in the streets. And let me tell you something, it's parties, rave parties throughout the street. And you'll see the aftermath. By 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, you'll see young people all over the place, drunk as a skunk, in the streets of Jerusalem and throughout the nation of Israel. And then we won't even get to Purim, because when we get to Purim, that's when they have Purim. They do their feast of where they let down their hair, and they say that's one day that they can let down their hair and drink as much as they want until they can become drunk as much as they want.